You've ever wondered what your life purpose was? If you've ever dreamt that you could be so much more, I'd ask you why you're waiting, I'd ask you why you sit. Why don't you get your light bulbs and get out of this bed? Standing strong in your light bulb, standing strong in your love, having strength.
Namaste. My name is Suzanna Maria Emmanuel. I am the designated channel of the Great Father Emmanuel and Caeayaron, who are here to teach us how to step into great love by gifting us lessons of love and greater flows of love. 2,000 years ago, when the Great Father Emmanuel called me to work with him, my mission was very similar to the mission I have today. I was to speak to the people and allow the Great Father to be heard by the people. Many followers of the Great Father Emmanuel heard about the great promise of freedom coming. They knew that it was not myself as Jesus who could possibly be the Saviour of the people, but they understood clearly that it was Father Emmanuel who would be the ultimate Saviour. They knew that I was the universal love channel, gifted to allow the words of divine to come through me. 2,000 years ago, I was known for my superior wisdom, because the wisdom of divine will always be far superior than the wisdom of man, which is why many desired to get rid of the love I could bring through to the people, which brought empowerment to them upon them receiving the great love through my universal love channel, and the love they felt pouring into them during the transmissions that came through my universal love channel. I have been asked at this time to again transmit the same teachings through with a Great Father to help many understand divine truth, as it is time for divine truth to become heard by all nations, tribes, and people, so that all becomes clarified. Now is the time to understand divine truth, but not to turn to anger, but to step into forgiveness with all that has happened. Since the crucifixion time, the Church has turned the teachings of the Great Father Emmanuel into teachings of pain and conflict, causing enormous conflict within the people. They brought the consciousness of torment of the soul within the consciousness of the people, and brought war with it to the nations, all based on false teachings. They turned divine truth into lies. This is what Jesus also saw 2,000 years ago. That is why he called those who twisted the great love teachings into teachings of pain the hypocrites. There were spiritual leaders who proclaimed they knew all that the Great Father Emmanuel was teaching, but instead of teaching love to the people, they brought judgment and sin into their minds, because that enslavement consciousness brought the leaders into greater power. I invite you to please listen to this following message as I read it to you. This is part of a series called Embracing Universal Truth, pamphlet number 2, called The Superior Wisdom of Jesus. How the people were restricted under the laws of the spiritual authorities. Jesus, the divine universal love channel sent by the Great Father Emmanuel, always helped the people to move forward into their hearts of love. He understood that love was the path of evolution forward for the people in those days, who were heavily burdened down by the laws of judgment by the spiritual leaders and authorities. They could not move forward to a higher pathway of hope, love, and understanding without higher direction. The laws in those days kept the people restricted with their knowledge. This was part of the reason why those laws were put in place, to restrict the people from expressing freedom, laughter, hope, and intelligence. The spiritual leaders worked together with the powers of law. They used it as their own authority. They understood well that by placing heavy burdens of fear consciousness within the people would stay restricted within their own intelligence. The more fear the people held, the more the spiritual and ruling authorities became empowered. The spiritual leaders understood well that by keeping the people in restricted thought consciousness, that the people would not be able to feel free asking for higher knowledge. Unless the people belonged to the higher spiritual class, they were not permitted to ask for higher intelligence. This is why the people were not able to establish stable foundations for their own lifestyles. All they worked for with hard labor was taken away by the spiritual and commanding authorities. The people who entered their spiritual houses, the houses of knowledge of the spiritual leaders in charge, needed to obey their laws. If they did not obey their laws, they were severely punished, and many were put into slavery situations or painful deaths. The spiritual leaders would enforce the people to learn their laws, and heavy punishments were given to those who could not learn the laws or keep the laws. Because the people were restricted with learning, being able to read the laws was difficult for many. This is why the people feared the spiritual leaders, because they made it almost impossible for the people to remember and live by their laws. This frightened the people, and they did not dare speak out as a people. Jesus was seen as a rebel by the spiritual and ruling authorities because he desired to bring freedom to the people. He knew from the time he was little that the sacred promise of freedom would come through him, as this is what Emmanuel, the universal creator, desired for the people, to bring the people out of spiritual bondage and slavery onto the pathway of freedom and life. How Jesus would bring through the pathway of freedom. At a very young age, Jesus knew spiritually, because he received many visits from the Great Father Emmanuel, that he was sent to the people to bring through a message of freedom, to bring the people out of slavery and bondage, so that the intelligence could return to the people to allow the people to move forward as one. This would bring the people the choice to either stay into the pathway of bondage or to become free by listening to the Great Father Emmanuel. His own people, the Essenes, celebrated Jesus. They recognized him to be the bringer of freedom, as that was the purpose of his path, to be the bringer of hope, love, and freedom. Many of his own people were extremely gifted and knew Jesus walked with Emmanuel, who would bring messages through no one else other than Jesus. They knew Jesus was sent from divine realms to be with the people. They also knew Jesus needed to be guided to allow his gifts to grow. This is why Jesus needed to be heavily protected by his own people, as many, not in love, also knew of the prophecies of his arrival and what that meant. They knew that it would mean that the people would begin to become free from their enslaved consciousness, because Jesus was sent by divine to be the deliverer of the message, the promise, to set the nation of Israel free. This is why the leaders, who did not desire the nation of people to become free, tried to destroy Jesus when he was little, to stop the everlasting freedom promise coming to the true nation of spiritual Israel. How Jesus was being prepared for his divine mission ahead. Jesus was a gifted boy who grew up in a busy household. He was well supported by his family, and they desired Jesus to understand all he could about his own people's history, because they knew that his mission would entail bringing the wisdom and messages through from the Great Father Emmanuel. They respected the laws of love and desired harm to come to no one. They lived by the laws of love. They respected each other and desired love to exist within themselves. Jesus was loved by his own people, especially by his mother Mary, who understood her position was a divine privilege. Mary, a well-respected woman in the household of Jesus, knew she needed to bring the ancient knowledge through to Jesus, to give him a strong foundation of support to grow upon. She taught Jesus to stay in the forgiveness, especially once he began to learn about the history of his own people. Jesus worked with a team of gifted prophets and healers who understood that he needed guidance and support for his greater mission to come. They were visited by archangels who brought through many messages about the importance of Jesus. They knew they needed to guide him to the higher pathway, for if the Great Father Emmanuel could not properly align with his heart, then Jesus would never be able to fulfill his greater mission. If he could not align to his greater heart, then it would not be possible for him to open up his universal love channel strong enough to allow the Great Father Emmanuel to come through, to guide the people forward to the gateway of life. Jesus needed to learn much patience, love, and focus to embrace his true pathway. At times, instead of working on his gifts, he desired to wander off with his young friends when he needed to embrace his higher teachings with his teachers. Because he was a channel, from very early onwards, he was able to show his elders higher knowledge. Whenever they requested higher answers, he was able to help them with guidance because he was able to transmit higher intelligence through with his universal love channel. This ability to transmit higher guidance through surprised many other spiritual leaders when Jesus, as a young lad, was sent to their houses to show them the various spiritual gifts he had. Very quickly, the other spiritual leaders became envious of his gift of channeling because they themselves had no divine guidance. They were experts with their own laws, but were without guidance from a divine source. On the other hand, Jesus constantly brought in higher guidance. All questions they asked, he was able to answer quickly, which left them stunned. They attempted to trick him, but could not. Jesus outwitted all their questions, which often showed how flawed their own teachings were. It was not long before some of the spiritual leaders began to see how gifted this young boy was and desired to know who it was who was speaking through him. Some of the spiritual leaders desired to listen to him speak rather than argue against him, and this is why Jesus was able to keep visiting a few of the synagogues in the local area. Meanwhile, the people in the villages heard about the teachings coming through Jesus, and several desired to visit him while he opened up to greater thoughts from the Great Father Emmanuel in front of the spiritual leaders. The knowledge Jesus brought through truly astounded them. Even the most knowledgeable of the priesthood could not deny the intelligence of Jesus. Jesus refused to become part of the spiritual class based on the old spiritual laws. Jesus did not desire to become part of the priesthood of the spiritual leaders. When he was asked to be part of them, he refused. He said, "I am here to bring divine love and freedom through to the people. I am not to teach from your platform. My Father Emmanuel has clearly stated to me that I am to bring the people into freedom and love. Therefore, my path is not to be standing with other spiritual leaders, for how can the new pathway be created when I am forced to work with the ways of the old? I have been told by the Great Father Emmanuel that he will bring in a new foundation to help the people to understand a higher path of love and freedom. The new foundation is not the pathway of the old, but a new pathway based on love. Why many became embittered against Jesus. This is why many in the spiritual organizations became angry and embittered with Jesus from a very early age, because he did not desire to be part of them. Instead of standing strong with religious authorities, he showed up their flaws, and many people who began to listen to Jesus understood the difference between what he brought through with the Great Father Emmanuel versus what the spiritual authorities brought through. Some of those who saw the gift of Jesus helped to prepare the way forward when it was time for Jesus to truly embrace his divine mission. Jesus constantly stayed in the love and on the pathway of the love. The spiritual priesthood of human authorities desired Jesus to be one with them because he held divine knowledge and superior intelligence. His intelligence far outreached the intelligence of the wisest people. This is why his own people became strong with gifts and intelligence, because Jesus constantly showed his own people all he could through his universal love channel. Because the demands would become great on Jesus, his guardians took him often away from the people, to allow his universal love channel to strengthen and grow before it was time to begin his divine mission. At that time, when it was time to embrace his divine mission, he would bring enormous love flows through from the Great Father Emmanuel. It would take a few years before the sacred flows of the Great Father Emmanuel could truly come through to guide the people into higher gifts of love and knowledge. This is why Jesus constantly needed training and guidance, so that the people could receive the way forward with higher intelligence, love, and wisdom, preparing them for the way ahead. Namaste, sending you much love, flows of awakening and peace. My name is Suzanna Maria Emmanuel. Sovereign Father Emmanuel approached me spiritually in 2009 and began to work with me as a channel to bring through his voice. In 2010, I began actively working with my Universal Love channel before groups so that others could begin to hear the messages being spoken. In 2014, Caeayaron approached me and my Universal Love channel deepened to allow the Universal Divine Love alignments to begin in 2015. In 2019, my Universal Love channel grew greatly to allow me to hold greater Universal Love flows, to allow the Messianic gateway of 2020 to open, to allow the Great Father Emmanuel to come through with his greater Universal Love flows. The stronger my Universal Love channel grows, the more divine can do for us. This is why they constantly strengthen my channel to allow the people to grow into more love for those who desire to gain their codes of life back at the Universal Love Divine Activations with the Great Caeayaron, the Great Sovereign Father Emmanuel, and myself as the Universal Love Channel, the word greetings.
What your life purpose was, if you've ever dreamt that you could be so much more, I'd ask you why you're waiting, I'd ask you why you sit, why don't you get your light bulbs and get out of this bed, standing strong in your light bulb, standing strong in your love, having strength, having courage, bringing life from above, standing strong in your light bulb, standing strong in your